Hi, everybody. My name's Joe. Welcome to the Tabletop Theory podcast, where we get to talk with people from all over the internet and all over the world about RPG stuff and all the cool things that they get to do. So today, my guest is Kat Oliver, and she is the creator of the Delves Daily comic strip that is on Twitter. It's Dungeondelves Daily, correct?
Yeah, or just Dungeondelves. It's kind of a little inconsistent across the socials, but Dungeondelves is kind of what I've landed on at this point in time.
Sounds great. And it's just this really awesome, really thoughtful comic strip about RPGs and the people that play them. And I am really excited to talk to you today. I'm a huge fan, and I've actually gotten a chance to use some of your art as an inspiration for one of my videos in the past. And it's just great to talk to you today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm glad that it's been somewhat inspirational in the past.
It absolutely has. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that you have a collection of your comics coming out soon.
Yeah, so I've got a collection. Volume 1 is on pre-order until May 30th. Yeah, I'm really excited. There's 60 comics in there. Over 10 are exclusive to the Volume 1. And yeah, this is my first time kind of trying to sell any of my art, so I'm like super excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to get it. I'm placing a pre-order, and I'm looking forward to getting it myself. So, like you said, it's like the first time you've gotten a chance to do this. So, what sort of was the inspiration behind putting something like this together?
It's been kind of a long time in the making. So when I started over on Tumblr, and the kind of goal for my blog at the time was to draw something every day because I felt like I was not keeping up with my art, and I just felt like I could do more. So I just picked the topic tabletop RPGs because I can talk about them a lot. And it kind of developed into comics. So at the start, it kind of started with me just drawing some of the characters. I was very into an Exalted game at the time. So there
Oh, I
was,
love Exalted. I'm so excited. I've got like the second edition core book like right over there.
oh,
I'm,
yeah, me
I'm
too.
That's awesome. Yeah, sorry. Keep going.
um yeah, so it was very heavy with the stuff that was going on there, and it kind of became comics because I was just really excited to be like, oh, what's happening, this is what's happening to my guy, oh, he's in so much trouble. And yeah, it kind of went from there, and then I started, we kind of took a break, but I wanted to keep doing the stuff, and it became um about the games I was playing. And then sometimes when there was a bit of a break, I would do comics that was more about like my feelings towards tabletop RPGs, or things that I just thought were quite universal,
Hmm.
like things that other people could, kind of associate with. And it's just kind of grown from there. And I've just really enjoyed doing it. And I've had so much support from like so many wonderful people. And I just wanted to kind of take some more time to work on them a little bit and to put like the
Yeah.
anthology together, because the reason why they were called daily Dungeondelves is because I draw it every day with the intention of drawing something every day. That's always been the goal. So I wanted to take some time to clean them up a bit because a lot of them are just done on my lunch breaks. And
Really?
yeah, so sometimes that's why the posting schedule is a bit inconsistent. I don't post always at the same time because sometimes it's on my lunch breaks, sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's after work because it's been a really busy day at work and I had to work through my lunch break. Um, so I wanted to kind of take the ones that I thought did well. This one's kind of featured around players, so I wanted to take all of the comics that had like a player theme and
Okay.
clean them up a bit, and add some new content and kind of have them flow a bit together. So me and my editor have kind of worked together to kind of have like make them a bit of a set, with the intention of, if this does really well, maybe like next year I'll do one that's more featured on game masters, and go into that side. And then like the kind of soft plan after that is to do one maybe featured about characters, not necessarily my own characters, but more things that are associated with characters rather than the players.
Yeah.
Because these are all themes that I kind of do. I don't really have a rhyme or reason for which one I pick. I just kind of see how I feel that day. But that's kind of how I, in my head, categorize the theme. So it's like it's either about a player, it's about the GM experience, or it's about characters. Like it's a situation inside of a game. So that just seems to be the natural way to divide it, and it seems quite natural for me to start with the player experience because that's quite a universal thing. And yeah, so I just wanted to tidy that up and see if it was something that people would, want to buy in comic book form. So I'm really happy that it's had such a positive response.
I've been reading your comics since I started like back doing this. Gosh, it's wow. What's the date today? It's almost a year ago today,
Wow.
and it it's really amazing to me to like see a lot of the comics that you draw and like how relatable they are for like a lot of the situations that I've been going through. You made one, I think it must have been a few weeks ago, about like the anticipation of running a game and how that sort of like can feel sort of like heavy. And then the act of like actually running the game and you're sort of in it and you're flowing through it and everything's sort of like moving really well. But then after the game's over, you're like, did that go well? You're like questioning yourself. You're thinking back through all the choices. And I read that and I'm like, that's exactly how I feel after I like start running a game. And like, obviously the comic is sort of, I'm assuming, an expression of how that feels for you. But like, how do you deal with that sort of like pre, during, and post sort of like anticipation and then exhaustion from after running a game?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I experience myself, and it's something that I see in my friends as well. So I kind of have a very close knit group that I play games with, and we uh, switch GMs whenever we switch games, and we all have those kind of um, habits of like when the game's running, everyone's super in it, and we're all having fun, and then afterwards, it's
Mm-hmm.
always like a did you guys actually like have fun though? And how I deal with it, a lot of it is double checking with my players and my friends, asking them, just to make sure that did go well, right? That wasn't just me. And then just opening up the floor, like, is there anything that I can do better? What in particular did you enjoy? Just so that I kind of know what they like to do and what they want to play so that I can, tailor my style around them. Because I remember very early on, I remember being shown like a passage in, I think it must have been the fourth edition Dungeon Master's Guide. There was like a paragraph talking about um, different types of players and how to tailor being a dungeon master to those type of players.
I
And
think I remember that.
yeah, and I always like that. It's not necessarily that you should, you know try to be pleasing everyone. It's more just
Mm-hmm.
kind of being aware about other people's play styles, because some people like to be in the foreground. They like to be very heavy on the role play, and
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and some people like to be um, they like to be along for the ride. They just don't want to be the main attraction, and
Mm-hmm.
it's making sure that those people are still involved while not forcing the limelight on them, and simultaneously making sure that
Right.
the other person like shares the spotlight, and kind of getting a mix of things that people like to do. And so I always try to keep that communication open with the people I play games with. Um, and it helps when they GM, they do the same with me. So I think we've got like a really open, healthy sort of relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, like, as a game master, it's the idea that you're taking this time, sort of either during the game or at the end of the game, to sort of get that feedback. And I don't know, for me, when I first started doing that a long time ago, it was like, it kind of felt like I was fishing for compliments, but it was also like, if you don't trust your players to help you improve what you're trying to do, it's hard to grow. as a game master, and that sort of like open and honest, I guess maybe not criticism, but I guess you could call it criticism, just sort of like conversation is really important, I think, especially when you're trying to like learn how to become a much more sort of appropriate game master to the type of games your players want. Because like it's like you said, you're kind of reacting to what your players are looking for in the moment. You're sort of thinking about what they have to say, and you want to make the game as fun for them as you can. So it just makes sense to sort of have that moment of just sort of like touching base with your players to figure out how you can work together to create something that works best for everyone.
Yeah, totally. Because a lot of the time, things like they go really well, but especially when maybe I've planned a scenario and it's not quite landed as I intended. Maybe like
Yeah,
after the game, I'll go back and be like, "Hey, that didn't like. What about that? Like, wasn't cool." And I think a lot of the time, for me personally, it's when I kind of lose focus on the players. So you get very caught up in like your plans and your world and your
I
monsters.
see.
And
Yeah,
sometimes I always try to bring it back to the players, and they effectively are the main characters. And sometimes if forget that, it can they can just make them a bit bored or feel like like they're taking a back seat in the story. So that's just personally, I know, something that I try to work on and avoid. But yeah, it's just keeping that sort of open communication.
it's a tricky balance because if you've got these ideas for a campaign, and really no matter what system,
Mm.
just finding that balance between like the story that you've got prepared, but then also being receptive to what your players might be giving you in terms of like ideas or input for how that story might go. Because I mean, it's kind of one of those things. Like I found over the years that there's almost two distinct types of GMs, and those are the folks that spend like a good amount of time preparing, and then folks that spend almost no time preparing, and they just sort of wing the whole thing. And like I find myself pretty squarely in the wing it all the time category. But I'm wondering, what about you? Like, do you find that you find yourself sort of moving onto one side or the other, or is you feel like you're kind of finding a way to get into the center?
I feel like I walk the line. I feel like it depends on the system and the game. I'll be
That's a
perfectly
good point.
honest.
Yeah.
Um, I feel more confident winging D&D 5e than I
Mm-hmm.
do some other things. But the game I've run the most of is Exalted. Um,
That is awesome. I'm
and
so excited to hear you say that. More people
um,
should know about Exalted.
I do enjoy it a lot. Um, and I'd say the reason I'd say I walk the line in that system is because I will plan the game. My last story that I had with my players, I actually wrote up a very quick, for me, scenario of if the players weren't here, how would this scenario play out?
Yes.
So that I just know what the NPCs are doing without having to like really think about it.
Yeah.
And halfway through the story, the players had not done something very disruptive, but their actions had effectively thrown that plan into the bin. Just very simply. And it wasn't through like some crazy player shenanigans. It was just really just down to like a defining moment, and it just meant that all the NPCs' actions had kind of
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
in that instance, I kind of had to wing it, because in that instance, it meant like some people had moved, and because those people had moved, it meant that other people would then move on that as well. So, like just during that session, I realized that when it was started off as just kind of a conversation kind of session, like a planning,
Mm-hmm.
and then I realized, well, this is going to end in a combat now,
Right. Yeah.
because everyone's
There's
just
that moment.
yeah, right. This is no, it's just unavoidable now. So that was kind of a wing thing. And the other thing I kind of do with my NPCs in Exalted is I have, at least for the other Exalted NPCs, the powerful NPCs, I have a kind of their archetype, and I have a basic stat sheet in mind, but um, kind of give them a little bit of a like what I usually say is like a trial period. So if it's the first time on screen, um, I haven't really gotten their stats completely locked down until like effectively until they're in combat, and then once they've used a certain stat, it's like, okay, they've used this power, they have this power, and I'll make a note of it. And I've kind of done it in other systems as well, so where I have a basic idea of what this character to be, I'm like, okay, so this person's a detective, and so they'll come in and I'm like, this is their powers that they've got, and then like the characters might be like, oh hey, how are you at discerning other people's lies? And I'm like, he's a detective. Makes sense that he's, somewhat
Yeah.
intuitive. So I was like, okay, so he needs to be that. And then after they've had like a little bit of a back and forth with the players, I'll properly stat them and lock them down like within the next session, so that there's no kind of like, so the players don't feel cheated. Um,
Right, yeah. Because it's solid once you've sort of drawn a line with a specific attribute of the character. I think that's a really brilliant idea. I do something similar with some of my NPCs. Like if I'm dealing with a lot of like commoners or like just townspeople or something like that, like the sort of background NPCs. If the players inevitably are like, I want to go talk to the shopkeeper, or I want to go talk to the guy with the soup cart,
mhm.
then that player sort of that character sort of becomes like a named NPC, right? But you have like that, like what you were describing. What I do is I have like the sort of generic townsfolk stat block, but like once they have a name, I never thought about doing that. Just like making those small changes to their stats on the fly when it's applicable. But that's really smart.
Yeah,
That's a
so
fantastic idea.
in when you mention NPC, that actually is exactly what I did. So they rescued this human, this everyday guy, and just for anyone who doesn't know, Exalted is like a game where you're chosen of the gods, so you're effectively like demigods of powers. So they, as a player, you're a very powerful being in like a kind of fantasy setting, and they just rescued like just a regular guy, who hadn't really got much to go back to. So he was like, "Hey, how about I, follow you? I'm good at sailing. This is a seafaring campaign. I can be your cabin boy or whatever." And they did took him on. Eventually, they were like, "Are you sure? Because you could die." It was like,
This could be
eh,
dangerous.
yeah, it's like, it's fine. And so they were like, okay, you know what, we'll let you come along. What you can sail. What else can you do? And I think one of the players made this like passing joke of like, I mean, can you play the bongos? Because they were just like entertainment. And I was like, yeah, yeah, he plays bongos. It was just like, got a note, put dots in performance. Uh,
Specialized bongos.
yes.
That's awesome.
So,
And I'll be honest, like I didn't think we were going to get to talk about Exalted today. This is like one of my favorite systems ever. It's so cool
uh,
that it's your preferred system. I mean, a lot of those like White Wolf RPGs, I feel like they don't get a lot of love because I mean, fifth edition is obviously like really popular right
mhm.
now. I grew up and I probably have the most experience running third edition Vampire and Mage and Werewolf from that sort of era of like the early 2000s. But
Mhm.
like, oh man, Exalted's really cool. Yeah, like for people who are watching or listening and don't know what Exalted is, it's not fair to say that it's like D&D, but it's sort of a fantasy setting, but it's got a lot of really other wonderful aspects that are drawn in from like 1970s samurai and kung fu movies and Bollywood, and like there's so much to it, and the rule system is so wonderfully flexible. It's to me it's my preferred sort of fantasy setting RPG. I absolutely like love that system to death. It's so cool. So it like you said Exalted is like your system of choice right now, or is it sort of like moving around?
It kind of comes in waves. So I will be a player in an Exalted game soon. My campaign has kind of on pause while the
Mm-hmm.
my friend then like kind of runs his game because I started my game because he needed a break from his game. So I was like, let's
Okay.
like kind of back and forth.
That's really nice to be able to have that sort of like take the lead, take a back seat, take the lead, be a player. That's wonderful. Oh,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah. I realized that I'm quite lucky within my friend group, and that we've got quite a few of us like GMing. So we mix it up um, very frequently. Like it's rare
Hmm.
that somebody is the GM twice in a row, and it's just mostly so that we can give them a rest because we appreciate it's a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it takes a lot of work, I think, to be a game master, but it's oftentimes one of those things that when I talk to new players or people who are new to the hobby, they're like, "How can I do this? How can I become a good game master?" And it's like, well, it takes time. It's like learning any other skill, but I think so many of the new players that I talk to, they see the people who have been doing it for a long time, or they see the people who are very popular on the internet. I mean, it's hard for me to like speak negatively about Critical Role just because it's helped so many people get into the hobby, but it's obviously the sort of like the Matt Mercer effect, right? Where everybody's just like sees that as the example of like how to be a dungeon master, and everyone's like, oh, well, if I can't do that, then why try? But like getting into the hobby, I think it's it's so important to take that first step and to have that type of friend group or just people with you to like give you the chance to try and make those mistakes and learn and do all that stuff. So that's really cool. That sounds like a really great arrangement with your friend group to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I agree. You need to give yourself quite a break. My first experience with GMing was in a homebrew Pokemon RPG game that had been made online. Um,
Cool.
it it was well, the campaign was such a train wreck in my opinion, but the players look back on it very fondly. So
This what counts.
yeah, that's positive. But we decided we were like, what if it's like a post-apocalyptic Pokemon setting, and you can have
Whoa.
all of your Pokemon out at once? And I was like, yeah, sure. I don't see anything going wrong with that. Um, and very quickly we realized that turn orders were just horrible.
Yeah, that sounds like it might drag a little if you've got like every player having like more than one summonable creature. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and
That
each player can have a turn as well because in that system, players had like trainer moves, so it was
oh wow.
a horrendous turn order. Um, but we had fun. um, I
That's what
get,
counts.
yeah, it was just the very early on GMing stuff. So I just was anytime someone had a suggestion like that, I was like, that sounds cool, let's do it. And then I
Yeah.
realized like, oh wait, no, this is horrible.
Yeah, yeah, it's oh god, thinking back on like the first campaigns that I started running, I I I think I ran my first campaign when I was 6, and I just absolute like complete lack of any cohesive story or anything like that, because like when you're 6 you don't really know what narrative structure is, right?
Mm.
But it's like you look back on those early campaigns and you're like, wow, I've you still remember those early lessons, right? You still remember like when the player who comes to you who's like read more of the book than you, and they're like, I want to do this, and you're like, okay, that seems like a cool idea, and then you realize suddenly what you've let them do and it's just completely game breaking.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's an important lesson to learn, but it can be a lot of fun sometimes. But yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to ask you sort of a question I've been wondering for a while since I've been reading your comics for a little bit. A lot of your comics have to do with adopting pets in game. So, how did that start?
Cool. So, a lot of the time with my comics, I would say if there's a scenario that involves like a person, I would usually draw them as me, even if it's a trait from one of my friends in my game group.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's kind of why I keep the majority of other people in my comments very nondescript. It's a habit I've picked up from just drawing comics through my life where I would only ever depict myself and I would just
Okay.
not depict other people to kind of protect privacy, or if I was like referencing a situation and other people didn't
Yeah.
really want me to like single them out, I've just gotten into the habit of drawing everyone just kind of generic NPC. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it also just comes from some anime that I used to watch where they would just as a joke they'd just draw stick figures in the background, and I always found that very funny. So it's kind of a privacy thing, and also I just find it kind of funny that everybody else looks like the same. Um,
That makes
but
sense. Yeah.
in terms of adopting, um, there is one person in particular in our game group who is just a collector, is a Pokemon master, and will always have tag-alongs. So in D&D, um, they have had like a direwolf, they've had like a hippogriff, a rock, eagle, a phoenix. There's been quite a few pets. When we played Warhammer, they played a tech priest, and they would invent like servo skulls, and that would be effectively their little squad. They'd have a squad of
Mm-hmm.
machines. Um, Obviously, Pokemon RPG was is
It's all about collecting animals.
all about collecting animals. And while I would say they are the biggest culprit, I definitely also have my fair share of collectibles. My very first D&D character had a little goblin tag along named Stab, who I loved.
That's a great
Um,
name for a goblin friend.
I can't remember if that was, I think that was just the name. I think it was one of those scenarios where we were like, you follow us now. What is your name? And that was his name. It was Stab. He was
There you go.
a little goblin wizard. And it was fourth edition, so he had like a, even though he didn't level up, he had a particular power of he had like an AoE where things kind of had some sort of minus. So even though he didn't level up, we basically were like, Stab, you stay back there, you do your thing, and give us that buff. We'll go
Yeah.
in and sort out everything else. Stab is the thing that is, Stab is the one that I imagine is the one that I remember the most. But I do also, I know I've picked up other creatures along the way. I think to a degree we all do it.
Yeah, definitely. I know I've done it when I've been a
Hmm.
player.
Yeah, in my Exalted game, I've got a demon summoner who has three demons, who have been all affectionately named. We have Octopus, Crimson, and Thomas. Um, one of the other players has a Brinker as a follow along, which is like a little elemental water dog, which is terrific.
That's awesome.
One of them has a familiar parrot, another has a familiar red panda. Um, so I'm just as well as being in a campaign as a player surrounded by other players' pets or my own pets as a GM, I actually quite like playing those pets as well. So like, you know,
That's a
okay,
good point. Yeah.
so like occasionally if there's just a bit of a lull in chat with the when the players are talking to each other, I might just have like, you know, the parrot come in, and they've got their own little personalities that have kind of invented. So the parrot's very prissy, and he's like,
Mm.
"Look at me, I'm fabulous." So just come in, and because one of the other players is like a penguin Luna, there's this running gag where the parrot would just be like, "I'm the better bird," and the other Luna would be like, "No, you're not," and it's just a thing we do. Either that, or I'll use the red panda, who is notorious for stealing food and other such things. He's just a curious little guy who likes to be fed. Um, So there's a long conversation. I'll be like, "Oh, hey, your bag feels a bit lighter," and I'll be like, "Where's the red panda? Where's Iroh?" I'll be like, "He's up somewhere. I don't know. Pass the perception check. See if you can find out where he's gone." So I really enjoy having like that extra element, whether or not it's
Hmm.
as a player, just kind of having like that little buddy, or as a GM, kind of like bringing those other characters to life.
That's a really cool idea. Yeah, it sort of it reminds me of the sort of follower mechanic from older editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Like once your character gets to a high enough level, then you end up with the potential to have like followers and like basically people that can like do things for your character when you're not around. I think Matt Colville released a book called Strongholds and Followers, which sort of updates those mechanics for more recent editions of D&D. And it's kind of interesting, but I love the idea of your players being able to sort of attract different people to help them in their quests. And,
Mm.
you know, I think one of the things that I've found over the last few years is having the capability to have a NPC that's there with your group, even if they're not able to help in things like combat. It's really helpful for me as a game master to just be able to sort of interject in game as a way to be like, well, I don't know if we should go down that way, or well, we got hired to do this, or well, I'm not paying you to do that. It can help to steer the campaign a little bit sometimes if the players are feeling either kind of indecisive or they just may actually not know what to do next. It's helpful to be able to do that, but like I love the idea of it being an animal companion almost. That's really cool. That's a neat idea. So your goblin friend Stab got me thinking of a question. So names are, I think, they're either some folks find them to be really kind of not a big deal, and other folks find them to be sort of this big, really meticulous thing that people have to like as a game master you have to make sure that your characters have like the best names or they have the right names. I think I remember hearing an interview with, I think it was J.K. Rowling, where she's like, I can't create a character until I have their name perfect. And I'm wondering, like, how do you feel about coming up with names for your characters or your NPCs?
Um, so it's kind of different for if they're an NPC or if they're my character. So as a player, I do quite like to delve into a name, even if it's just like a very superficial meaning behind it. So my exalted character is called Bjorn, and he's called Bjorn because he's a polar bear lunar. And it's just that, just kind of having that association. And like I usually like to look into a name. My usual first point of call is I'll pick up personality trait. So like if they're like very bold or outgoing, I'll find a search term like that. So like names meaning like bold, and then I'll go through like a name list. And so a lot of my characters have that kind of association. I can't remember, one of my other characters I've played a lot of is called Astra, and I can't remember the search term that I put in for Astra, but she is a very bold rogue. She's very confident. She's quite forthright and honest. She really hates the stereotype of the rogues being like the charlatan and the liar, and
Yeah.
gets very upset when people accuse her of lying. Uh, um, and that's typically the path I go when I am thinking of characters. I'll come up with some search term, look through names lists, and kind of go that way. And for big NPCs, when I run a game, I will kind of do that. But I'm also very happy like when the characters will kind of when the players find an NPC that I wasn't planning on to pull up a name generator. So like this NPC, this mortal that I mentioned before, uh, he kind of came out of the blue, and when they were like, "What's your name?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I don't know. So I kind of just pulled up like a name generator. I was like, okay, he's from this like island setting, so I kind of want his name to be like reminiscent of that. So I just pull up a name generator and I just look through the first couple of names that I get, and I was like, Maru, that sounds nice. Let's go with whatever that name is. Um, just because when I don't want to slow the game down
Yeah.
too much just based on that sort of thing. So when I'm picking an NPC on the fly, I tend to pull up a generator.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be like elf name generator, or based on location or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I do like to put some thought into the names, but it doesn't it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But I do like to think of I do like to have some kind of meaning in them when I'm naming my player characters.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of the names having meaning sort of contextually or sort of within the universe of the game. I think it's something that I overlook that a lot. Sometimes when I'm coming up with names for characters, I'll literally just name them after things that I just like kind of see in my field of view, which is admittedly extremely lazy. But I think a few years ago, I had a game master tell me what they did was they had like a little like shot list of names for just like people and things and places. And so anytime the players would come to them and be like, hey, what's this soup vendor's name? And they would just go down the list and they'd be like, their name would be Kanan. And like the only reason that you've thought of that is because I've got like a Canon lens cap just like sitting right here on my desk. But for now on, like that's the name of the soup vendor. And it just sort of like gives you an opportunity to just name people weird things. But one of the things that I've sort of thought about, like I'm running a world right now with two different games, and the world is named Huld, Huld, and that didn't come from anything. It's just sort of like the etymology of that word was like I didn't really put too much thought into it, and now several years later, having still played that game with like some players have rotated out, some new ones have come in, the whole name itself has sort of developed a mythology, even though it's just like a nonsense word, or it's what happens when a ship gets a hole blown in the side of it. It gets hulled. But like it's interesting to see how names for places or characters get to take on meaning to me over like the course of a campaign or something like that. Because I don't know if it's happened to you, but sometimes when I'm reminiscing about like things that have happened in the past, and I'll have a player be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that one time we went to that one pub. What was it called in the game?" And one of the other players is like, "Oh yeah, it was Vasha's," and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, Vasha's," and it's this whole reminiscing thing about this like completely imaginary place, but it all has this really cool association just based around the name, and I've always found that to be really interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I think so as well. Haven't the thing I can think of the most is so my players before we at the beginning of the last adventure they got a new ship, a really nice ship before they had this like really small dinghy, and there was a lot of pressure on what to name it, because I was like, your ship, you get to name it, guys, and
Yeah.
it was there was a lot of it was all through in between sessions, and there was so much chat about what to name it, and in the end there was just so much indecision that they were like, we're going to ask the small god of the ship what they want to be called. So I'm like, effectively you're asking me to name the ship, passing the pressure on to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I ended up I come up with a few different names because I was like, they clearly care about this a lot. The fact that they're
Yeah.
like, we don't want to screw this up, so we'll just ask the object, the guardian of the object itself to name
Right.
it.
Right.
Which I, as a GM, I thought was a really nice idea, and was unexpected because in Exalted you can just summon the god of the ship and be like, what would you want the ship to be called?
Right, yeah.
Um, and I was like, that's quite considerate of you guys. And ended up coming up with some names, and the name that everybody really really liked was oh gosh, um, oh it was like was it the Hero's Bounty? No, it was the Hero's Refuge. That is what the ship is called. It is the
It's a good name
Hero's
for a
Refuge.
ship.
Um, yeah, I was happy that everyone liked it. So it's that has like a special place in my heart now because of like it was such a decision that had like so much weight and the players really cared about it, and the fact that they
Hmm.
really liked that idea and they've ran with it, and it's been like a huge part of like their party identity. And like we made a map of the inside of the ship, and I got a ton of furniture and different tokens in Roll20, and I was like, guys, you can
Nice.
decorate your cabin. So everyone decorated their cabin.
Oh, that's really cool.
That was very fun. I got to see a lot of the personality of the characters as well. So the wizard immediately took all of the books and all of the paper and jammed them in the room, and it's this horrifically messy room, just full of everything.
Hmm.
And then on the other side of the spectrum, the big strong like warrior type just kind of took a cushion and a chest, and that was it. That's all that's in their room. Is that all? That's all I need. I was like,
Just very Spartan.
yes, very much. And then all the other players are like kind of in between. Like one of them's got like
Hmm.
a mannequin to put on like their armor when they're not wearing it, and some of them have got hammocks. Some of them have gone for more like bedding, and it was just quite a fun exercise to see like the comforts that
Hmm.
the characters enjoyed. And I really enjoyed doing it, and I think I always recommend it as a thing for GMs if your players have like a base to if you've
Yeah.
got the time to like visualize the base, because it ended up being like a really good exercise in like just coming up with what the character would have in their room, just like things you
Yeah.
don't think about. And I really enjoyed it because they have this little meeting room that they set up, and they dragged the sofa in there from another room. And
Nice.
like on Roll20 they always like turn they like so they'll so that it's just these little quirks that I really like. So one of them will turn the chair around when they're sitting on at the table, so they're like sitting on it in an awkward way. And they'll like anytime they're talking to each other they rotate the tokens so they're looking at each other, and it's
That's
just
really cool.
it's so cool. I love all the just the little quirks that they really use on the Roll20 map. Like they're fantastic players, and they just
That's a really awesome group of players. It
mm,
sounds like they're really into just like not only role playing but also like moving the minis to role play how they work. That's really cool.
yeah.
Is that something that you've done even before sort of coronavirus sort of changed how things work, where people moved a lot of their games online? Were you online before that, or is this something that you've done since then?
We were online before that, so I think we're quite practiced in those ways. Um, we would just kind of because we all quite live quite far apart. We met in uni, and then went back to wherever we came from afterwards.
Yeah.
So we would meet up for birthdays and special occasions and things like that, and sometimes play games around the table. But most of the
Mm-hmm.
time it was online. And really the pandemic, all it's done is it's taken away the special events, which is quite sad. But we'll introduce them again as we kind of will get comfortable, and things
Right.
are done, when things are safe, and we're happy
Mm-hmm.
to do so, and we're happy to travel those distances. But
Yeah. And I think that's kind of how a lot of groups that I've been a part of, they started online and they didn't necessarily always meet in person. But I've also been a part of a lot of games that have really just been in person and then moved online. The groups that I run for some of my students, we were all in person, and then we ended up having to move online over the last year. And fortunately, we've only recently been able to sort of start to trickle back into some of the players being able to meet in person, because some players they're not able to. But it's one of those things that like you definitely have to keep the safety factor in mind. But I think playing online, gosh, I remember when I was growing up, it was like, it was something that you always thought about. It was like being able to have this amazing virtual tabletop that you can do all of this cool stuff with and just like see where the monsters are specifically and like know exactly what's going on and how. I think it's really interesting to see how the industry has really embraced that technology. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember the name of this piece of software that I saw the other day. I'm gonna break my own rule and open up my Discord because one of my players sent it to me. But it's basically like a tabletop that you can play in VR. It's absolutely wild. Like you have all these tokens and stuff. And hang on, what the heck is this thing called? It's called Demio, and
Ooh.
basically it's like it's all 3D and it's all animated, but you're basically meeting in VR around this virtual tabletop, and of course you can like move stuff around, and that's a heck of a cost of entry. Like being able to afford like not only the software but the headset and the computer that can run it, but like just seeing how much technology has sort of grown up into this industry is really cool.
Hmm.
Just to see how things have changed.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's very cool to see like all of these things. Like usually it's just that I kind of catch glimpses of these things on Twitter where the devs are putting up examples, and it's
Mm-hmm.
always super exciting. Like, you know, with the recent Tailspire stuff, that's very
Mm-hmm.
cool. And yeah, just I'm always looking for something like that could make it like a little bit more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Because Roll20's always worked fine for us. I do appreciate that its interface can be kind of complicated for people who haven't who aren't as used to it, because we've used it
Yeah.
for quite a long time. So I feel like we've just kind of come accustomed to it. And then when the pandemic hit and people were complaining that it was kind of complicated, I kind of took a step back and was like, oh, yeah, its interface isn't the most intuitive. I do see where people are coming from. We're saying
Mm-hmm.
how it can be a bit complicated. So it's really cool to see like all of these new things that people are like able to get into a bit more. And you know, I just excited to see where it's gonna go.
I know. It's one of those things like you think 10 years down the road, like what's next? It's kind
Mm.
of a crazy thought to think about all that because so many people are seeing these new developments in technology, and like 10 years from now that's going to be old hat. It's going to be something that people are just sort of taking for granted. I mean, think games like Exalted, I feel like excuse me. I feel like games like Exalted are great because the ease of character creation and the simplicity to sort of teach that system is really, really great. But then you have something like D&D Beyond, where that sort of ease of access and just the ability to jump in and create a character digitally is also really, really fluid, that part of me worries that it sort of distracts or detracts from people playing these other games because it's too complicated, or I don't want to learn how to do the maths for something like Pathfinder, right?
Mm.
But I don't know. Part of me feels like it's a double-edged sword because it's like it's taking away from the sort of atmosphere of playing in person, but then the other part of me is like it's making it more accessible, so it's not all bad. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that idea of it? Like, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know.
I think it's good. I think it's kind of incorporating multiple games. So the thing that I've recently really appreciated about Roll20 is its interactive character sheets, because it has them for multiple games.
Yes.
And we have like our most recent adventures was like Cyberpunk Red, and the interactive sheet on there was so useful because it was kind of learning the new system. We didn't really know what we were doing, and in the end, it was like if you can just click that skill and it will roll your dice based on the stats that you've put in. So you
Right.
and from there we kind of learned it backwards. So it's like, oh, okay, so like you'd hover over the dice roll and you'd see in brackets the like the dice it rolled and all of the bonuses. So you could be like, oh, okay, so it runs off like this skill and this attribute, and that's how you roll this. And it will be green if it's a crit, and it will be red if it's a fail, and no,
Right.
just neutral if it's anywhere in between. So um yeah, I like found that very good for anything, obviously D&D Beyond is great, a great resource for D&D, but Roll20's got some really nice interactive character sheets for other system. And a recent one we've started playing is Traveller, and the sheets have got seem pretty good for that as well. When we're just pressing that, it's like we just have to switch over what attribute we're adding to it because it's a little bit more complex than Cyberpunk Red. But apart from that, it seems to be quite inclusive in those games. The only thing I can see is technology. If, it might make it harder for indie games to get noticed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Um, but we'll just see how that goes because I think just using a virtual tabletop, you could still pick up a game on itch and try it out with people. If anything, I'd say over like online it may even be easier. I don't know, just speaking personally, I know I don't mind going on itch, seeing a game and then just chatting with people on Discord about it. So it's making sure that like the indie scene doesn't get forgotten about so that we can
Yeah.
lift those up.
Because I feel like that, I mean, that's a really important point because so many of the really great games that a lot of us like really enjoy. One of my favorite ones is Offworlders. It's like games like that are the way that RPGs are going to be sort of serviced in the future. What's an indie game today might be a huge hit in like another 2 to 4 years. So that's a really good point, making sure that the indie game community is definitely still serviced by these large technology platforms like Roll20. That's a really good point.
Hmm.
I did want to circle back to a point that you made a while back about the idea of sort of planning how your game's going to go. You mentioned that you have sort of a way that you sort of describe what you think for yourself, like what the NPCs are going to do in like sort of that session. I mean, I do something similar where I think about what the bad guy's trying to accomplish, like in that session. Like, what are the bad guy's goals? Because in a lot of ways, it feels like that sort of situation is really helpful to me as a game master because if the players can go off and do whatever they want, the plot is going to keep moving. It's going to give them a chance to just accidentally happen upon the plot or sort of have the plot happen in the background and then they can react to it in a much more sort of organic way. But I'm curious, do you feel like that sort of plot planning is applicable in something like a pre-built adventure? I mean, I know to a certain extent that it is, but I also know that something like, I guess Rise of the Rune Lords, for example, for Pathfinder or Curse of Strahd or any of the Cities by Night for vampire stuff, it's a little more restrictive, but maybe not. I mean, I'm curious to what you think about that.
Yeah, I'll start off saying I haven't really run a pre-run adventure, so this is all
Okay.
me going on playing a pre-planned adventure that other my
Mm-hmm.
friends have run, and I would say I feel like they do think about that. Just we haven't gotten very far in Strahd because that was actually around the table before the pandemic
Okay.
struck. We got a little way into it, but not too far. And just judging by the way my friend was jamming that, I'd say he definitely seems to be considering where NPCs are, or like I know he's like I know he's tweaking it ever so slightly
Mm-hmm.
from like bits and pieces. Um, but I think it depends on how confident you are as a GM and how much you want to do that as a GM.
Mm.
So because I don't it's nice to have if you want the world to feel like quite big and bold and like things are kind of happening behind the scenes, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes when you run a pre-planned adventure, you kind of just want the you just kind of want to just go through it. For us when we've played through some, so we haven't done Tomb of Annihilation. We played through like a more modernized version of the old one. I've forgotten what it's called. But we also played through like the Giants adventure. And we kind of when we played that, it was less of us trying to get into like our characters and do world building. That was more like we just kind of want to get through this adventure and
Yeah.
just see how this goes. Like we randomized our characters and we like, we ended up getting into them quite a lot actually, but it was more of a break from that sort of thinking. So like, well, I think you could do that. It all depends on why you're running the pre-run adventure or if that's what you want to do.
That's an interesting point. Why you're running the pre-built adventure?
Because it
What,
might
what, what
be
do you?
it's I know some people might want to run a pre-built because not everybody wants to write their own adventure.
I see.
um
I see.
and so I can understand wanting to do some more world building if that's where you're coming from, in which case you probably could have the NPCs kind of, you could read like little splats in the book and be thinking, okay, so what is their goal? What are they going to do if the players don't interact with them? Or
Mm-hmm.
you could this a different person could pick up that adventure and be like, I want to run this as a break from me coming up with my own story. In
Yeah.
which case, that I feel like they're less likely to put that in. And I think it's just, it's entirely dependent on the group and
Mm-hmm.
like what you want to do with it, because there's so many different ways of running a pre-made adventure. You could see it as like something because you don't have time to write a story, or you could see it as like a stand-in and just like this is just a little dungeon crawl as a palate cleanser. And
Yeah. It's something else to do.
yeah, so like while you could, it's hard for me to imagine how I'd go about it because I haven't done it.
Mm.
um uh, and I probably wouldn't in that case, but I don't see why you couldn't. Like I'd imagine that some people could get very creative with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's an interesting idea. I mean, playing pre-planned adventure modules is I've run them before, but you're absolutely right. It just sort of depends on why you're doing it. I just never thought about it like that. If are you doing this? I think the term palate cleanser is really appropriate. It's the idea that it's just going to be something that you don't have to sink as much mental energy into because so much of the work has already been done for you.
Mm.
And so that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and sometimes you want to be a GM, but you don't have the time or the just the mental energy to write your own adventure because it is very taxing to
Mm.
create something from scratch. And like there's absolutely nothing wrong with playing a pre-made adventure at all. I mean, there's a reason why people write them, and there's so many people who write some like great adventures up online that you can
Yeah,
buy.
there's a lot of them.
And there's if that's not your thing, there's so many people who love doing that, and you can support through like their Patreons or whatever to do that stuff. So
Yeah. So that actually segues perfectly into sort of winding things down. We talked at the beginning. You've got a comic book coming out. So where can people find out more information about that?
yeah, it's all over on my Ko-fi page. So that's just Ko-fi slash Dungeondelves. I also have a lot of information about it on my Twitter, which is at Delves Daily, and my Instagram, which is Dungeondelves. So
That's great, and I highly encourage everybody to go pre-order the book and to go follow Kat on either of those platforms because your comics are awesome,
thank
and
you.
I'm really really happy that you took the time to come and talk to me today. So as I kind of end a lot of the interviews, I wanted to know if you wanted to take the opportunity to give some encouragement to some players or some artists with some affirmations or kind words.
Yeah. Um, so speaking to artists specifically, um, I would say if it's something that you're passionate about, um, just just keep going. Don't when I started my blog, I didn't start with any particular plan in mind. And I've been drawing these comics for 3 years, and I've been wanting to make comics for much longer than that. And I'm only just now getting to a place where I'm like able to try and create something to my like monetize my work. So if that's something that you're interested in, don't feel like you need to rush. Don't feel like you're, it's too late, or you're not good enough, or you don't know what to do. I think the plan is to just get something done. Just start something, and it doesn't have to be the thing that defines you, or your main thing. I think the main thing is to have fun and see where that adventure takes you, and then you can always leave that off and start a new project, um, and just keep going. It's always really nice to see people's artwork and character designs. And it's mostly really nice because you can see how much passion people have put into it. So as long as you're having fun, the rest will follow.
Yeah, that's great advice. As long as you're enjoying what you're doing, it'll fall into place. Well, Kat, thank you again so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it, and thank you all so much for watching. Take care, be kind, and have fun adventuring.